Thank you. And please call the roll.
Ms. Howard? Here. Ms. Cremiller?
Here.
Mr. Miller? Here. Mr. Liverman?
Here.
Ms. Butler?
Here.
Mr. Simon?
Here.
Mayor Lampert?
Here. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this special meeting of council where we're going over our ordinances and harmonizing them. And today is Monday, June 16th, 2014. And please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to start tonight's meeting with comments from the public, and this is for any items that are not on tonight's agenda. And we had the sign-up sheet, and the first person to sign up was Paul Driscoll.
Paul Driscoll on Harris Road, and I'm actually going to talk about something a little bit different tonight, but related. And basically, I have a concern about the process by which a rezoning of a parcel of land or a variance for a developer's project is brought before the planning board or town council, and the method by which this information is shared with the public. I've had discussions with many local residents, and there is widespread frustration with recent planning board approvals which are presented to the public seemingly, and I say this seemingly because from where you sit it may be different, but seemingly at a later stage when the project by that time has built up momentum and appears to have a power of its own. By the time the project is presented and the public input is heard, their concerns are more or less treated as smaller matters or too little, too late. So my question this evening is there a better way to notify the public in advance of a new project, such as, for example, the Franklin Street parking lot is coming up? So is there a way to include the public in the planning process so that they are more aware of what's at stake and can address their concerns in a thoughtful, effective, and impactful way? How can the comments from the public be included more often and at an earlier stage so that they can be made to feel a part of the process? And what can be done to make the residents feel that they are a part of the governing process and not merely subservient to it? So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for those comments and those questions. I'll try to do the best answering them at this point as I can. So, in general, the Franklin lot is a little bit different because, unlike a lot of the developments that come to us, that is part of the agreement that was made with Princeton University. So that will be owned by the municipality, and so whatever happens to that will be up to the governing body in a way that's different than if it's privately owned. Like, for example, the hospital site is privately owned. So, who they're selling to is up to the hospital. Who we have developed that property is up to us. And of course, taking feedback from the community. Hold on. What's the notes? I dropped. Oh, here it is. Thank you. One of the things that a few of my colleagues are working on, Ms. Cremiller and Mr. Simon, are something called advisory planning districts, and that's a task force that's been meeting and we hope will be presenting to us later this year. But that will hopefully be a mechanism, whether for the Franklin lot or for other development projects that come, where we can have a process that will help us notify neighborhoods of developments that are going to be occurring there, and have neighborhood, especially input from the affected neighbors at an early stage, or at least have the capacity for that. There's also something that the planning board always encourages developers to do, especially with major developments, and that's to present a concept plan early on in the process. So before they're filing official papers, they come, they present their ideas, they get feedback both from the planning board and the public, and that's the way the process has worked in the past, for better or for worse.
And can I add?
So in this particular case, it's different than some of the previous projects where, specifically the Franklin Street project, because I think what a lot of people are concerned with right now is the Witherspoon Street corridor and what the developments are going to be, because there's so much that's changing right now.
Right, and some of that land, most of it is privately owned, but the Franklin lot, once the university turns it over to the town, will be owned by the town, and that makes it different. But Ms. Krummeller, did you want to add something?
Well, I haven't gotten a chance to talk to you about this because the advisory planning districts, we've been talking about this very issue, and I know I share your views and concerns, and I think a lot of us do on the on the council, and on this committee. And one of the, we're trying to figure out a way to improve things, but the committee is we're hoping to give a status update at this, maybe in a July meeting if we have time, and have public comment on this very issue. But it might be in September, and then we were also planning a public meeting in September when people are around.
So that it could be done at the embryo stages, so to speak, as opposed to, sometimes we feel that we're coming in later and the powers are set in place.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the work of the Advisory Planning Districts Committee at this point, because I'm just telling you about that committee, because it's turning out that improving the planning process and making it more open is going to be, our major recommendation, and we're trying to figure out ways to do that. And we have some ideas, and Liz talked about them too, pretty much similar. Maybe Patrick can add to that.
Yeah, just to add to what Councilman Krummeller mentioned and what you asked for, in addition to trying to figure out how to improve the notification process for development projects, because the municipality is going through the process of reviewing our ordinances, we will be reviewing our zoning ordinances. So we're also trying to figure out how to work the public into that process so that neighborhoods understand the impact of the proposed ordinances for their neighborhoods. So that's all part of what we're working on. We have some ideas. We are going to need public input before we, finish our report.
And when would those meetings about the ordinances take?
It would be great if you're ready for the July 14th meeting. And then
That would be super,
okay,
yes.
All right, so
Okay,
July 14th.
thank you.
That will be the first. We'll need more time after that to continue.
Ms. Butler?
Well, the ordinances is the ordinance melding is going on with the Zoning Amendment Review Committee, and the advisory, we're talking about how to improve that process, but just if the nuts and bolts of it, some people might think it was the Code Review Committee that's doing the work for tonight, and I just want people to understand that the Code Review Committee is not doing the land use ordinances. That's the Zoning Amendment Review Committee, ZARC.
What's the code review? What does it mean?
The Code Review Subcommittee is just a small subcommittee that has been looking at at the ordinances and preparing them to come before council. We've been working with the attorney and sometimes staff members and sometimes members of the public to go over the ordinances and tweak them to reconcile between the borough and the township.
Okay.
So the members of the code review, and that's the primary purpose of tonight's meeting, is to go through some of the ordinances that this code review committee has been working on. And the code review committee is Ms. Krummeller, Ms. Butler, and Council President Miller. And we have to harmonize all of the old former borough and township ordinances. So right now, we're operating under these two sets of laws, and the goal is, at the end of this process, to have a single set of laws that apply uniformly. So that's part of what we're doing tonight. But the zoning, what people are saying is correct. The zoning, consolidating the zoning is a lot more complicated, and that's something that we also need to take on, and something that we will, before we make any change, there'll be public comment to it, and obviously we want to make sure that we're moving ahead with that too, because we don't want to be behind and be reactive when projects come before the planning board. But I encourage you to come. Part of this is getting a good process in place that allows for public comment. If you want to be a part of shaping what the process is, it sounds like we'll be getting an initial report of what the Advisory Planning District Task Force has been thinking of in terms of setting up that process on July 14th.
Okay, good.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to comment that you've raised a very challenging issue. And those of us that sit on the planning board have been concerned about it for quite some time. Those of us that were on the Consolidation Study Commission and the Transition Task Force, including Committeeman Simon and myself, were concerned about it as well. There's no legal way to require a developer to come forward with his or her plans for development until they're ready to submit them to the municipality for review, and ultimately, when they're declared to be complete after review, to the planning process. You can't require a private developer to disclose what it is they're planning to do until they're ready to do it. And that entails a specific process that involves submitting the plans to the planning office for review by staff and determination whether or not the plans are complete. And at that point, if they're deemed to be complete, they go before the planning board. The issue that you raise about the Franklin Street lot, as the mayor has commented, is very different from the normal planning process, because that would be a piece of municipal property and would be dealt with in open public meetings, just as any other municipal property would be dealt with. But getting in front of the planning process, in my way of thinking, really involves getting in front of it with the zoning and understanding what zoning is needed or required or wanted by the people that live in a particular area of the community, and getting that zoning on the books well in advance of a developer coming in with a proposed project.
So the meeting on July 14th, would that be a start of including the public to do that?
It would be the start of this conversation about what the process should be.
Okay.
Yeah, and how to involve these advisory planning districts, what they would be, how they would be organized, and what powers they would have, or what
Or
they
if
would
we
do.
have them at all.
Or if we have them at all, or what, right. I'll leave that an open question as to, what the task force has been working on, because we haven't really heard any reports yet from them, and so I think it's something that council's all very interested in hearing, I know, as well as the public.
Yeah, I should tell you that we have pretty much, we could not figure out a way to make advisory planning districts work. So we are focusing on improving the planning process, but I just want to warn people. It's okay.
Ms. Butler?
So just to be clear, though, there have been no discussions about the Franklin Street lot. There have been no decisions made about that.
There have been no decisions made. I know that there's lots of discussions being held, not by council, but I know there's different groups that are interested, and, I think whenever you have a piece of property that is going to be, potentially developed, I think there's a lot of conversations that are going on unofficially, but there's nothing that's come before council.
Well, one of the early concerns that people are having right now is the density. So whatever you're going to do there, it shouldn't be overly dense. It should be more in keeping with the neighborhood as it is now, factoring out the new development at the hospital site, which is different. In other words, I think people would like to see it done in context.
Right, and any change to the zoning would have to go through both bodies. It would have to come to council, it would also have to go to the planning board as well. And so it's a long process. There'll be a lot of opportunity for public input, and, those are going to be the key questions. So,
Could I just finish my comment? And that is that I would hope whatever is decided about the Franklin lot would be decided in concert with whatever planning we do for the Witherspoon corridor. And we did receive an email from a resident who was concerned about that, and I don't know if you want to comment on what our plans are and what the timetable might be for looking at the Witherspoon corridor.
Right, well, looking at the Witherspoon corridor and looking at the zoning on the Witherspoon corridor is on council's priority list for this year, and we've slated to do most of that work in the fall with the goal of having a consultant identified by the end of the year. And so, that's, again, those are not simple questions, and that's not a simple project, so it's going to take a significant amount of time, but the plan is to start it this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Albach?
Mayor Lempert, good evening. I have a letter for both you and Chief Sutter. I won't read the entire thing, but it's just basically dealing with the signage on Lytle Street for traffic. There is no posted speed limit, and there's only one children at play sign, which is visible only when someone is turning from the south end of Witherspoon Street. And if there's no one in the crosswalk, people just careen around that corner at whatever speed they were doing on Witherspoon without braking. The same coming from the north end, but at least there's a children at play sign. There's no posted speed limit. Some people, in fact, accelerate once they're going down Lytle Street. And the signage on John at Lytle is inadequate. I'm just sort of paraphrasing what I've got in this thing. So I'm wondering, number one, about how one goes about getting a posted speed limit, preferably of 20, but we'd be happy even with 25, an additional children at play sign, and on the John Witherspoon side, perhaps the placement of a do not enter sign, because the street sign itself is bent back on itself, and the one-way sign, people are coming up the street the wrong way fairly frequently and not stopping at the Witherspoon end. So they could end up crashing into an oncoming fire truck, police vehicle, whatever. But a do not enter sign might be more helpful. I don't know how that is brought about. But at least to put the one-way sign below the street sign. Right now it's directly to the right of it. It's almost attached to it. And it doesn't matter whether it's day or night. People are still coming down the wrong way. And speeding. Not all, but quite a few. Anyway, so I will give a copy of that.
Okay, thank you. And I will notify our traffic officer and also our Traffic and Transportation Committee to put this on their list.
Right.
Ms. Butler?
Well, I can just say they've been spending quite a bit of time in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood and also reviewing the signage and taking a look at it. I think they're going to, take out some that's no longer meets the standards. It may be too low. It may not be high enough at whatever. They really have taken a look and reviewing it all, and there's also, I think, the parking issue on Lytle, too. So they're looking at all of it.
Yeah.
On traffic and transportation, but certainly make sure Sergeant Murray sees that, and he can get back to you.
Okay, and the only other thing I wanted to do was, I don't know how many people here knew Ann Yasuhara. We were friends since about 1983. To the council, several weeks ago I referred, without revealing her identity, to a local humanitarian who had donated, at my asking her, a significant amount of money to aid the beleaguered tenants who had had the misfortune to inhabit 7 Lytle Street during the month of April 2014. The money I asked her for was to compensate them for the unfortunately inadequate recovery they made after suing the landlord, Sanford Zeitler. This lovely, decent person who donated the funds passed away this week, Ann Yasuhara, whom I had the privilege to call a friend for many years, died surrounded by friends and family. She was not a publicity seeker, unless on behalf of an organization or cause she believed in, but I wanted people to know that in the final week of her life, and despite enormous suffering, she was still persisting in being helpful to those around her. By helping that poor family, Ann helped me, and she knew it. I have learned that there is to be a memorial service for Ann Yasuhara at the Friends Meeting House, Quaker Road, on Saturday, July 5th. At 2 p.m., followed by a reception. I will greatly miss this wonderful, thoughtful, generous person. Myself, the eldest of 6 children, I'd always wanted an older sister, and she came close to being that for me. My condolences to Mitsuru, Anne's beloved husband, and I would like that placed in the minutes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Lerman?
Linda, thank you so much. Anne was a very sweet person. Yeah, I think all of us probably knew Anne, so we definitely feel your grief. Also, they were working on signage on Lytle Street today, so I don't know if they've taken care of some of
I
your...
was out for the day. I missed that.
Yeah, they were working today. Yeah, I was on Lytle Street today. They're working on signage, so they may have straightened up some of the things that
We work
Councilwoman
very quickly.
has spoken to you about. But they were on the street today because I
I'll
saw them.
cast my optics on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor.
Yeah, Ms. Butler?
I'd like to make a comment. I'd like to welcome back our Council President, Bernie Miller, and congratulate him on his victory. And as he and I have spoke before the meeting, but he said in his letter to the editor that his hand is outstretched for anyone who wants to take it, and I indeed did take his hand, and Bernie and I have agreed to meet for coffee, and I look forward to a continued good relationship with Bernie. So congratulations. Welcome back.
And reciprocal congratulations to Ms. Butler on a hard-fought victory.
I'd also like to congratulate Council President Miller on his victory.
Yes, I would too. I congratulated you in absentia, but I would repeat it since you're sitting here.
Me too.
Okay. Excellent.
Well, me too.
I did, but thank you. And are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak on items that are not on tonight's agenda?
I apologize. I just came in from Washington, D.C. I was testifying about Syria, State Department. I apologize.
Well, yes, you have perfect timing, so.
Good, thank you. My questions are, first of all, to congratulate Joe Butler and other members of the board here. We're concerned, I not only am, but many people in my neighborhood are concerned for the sake of the kids and the asbestos, and we wonder if those, the monitors they say are there, those 4 monitors, are actually in place, because we can't see them and we have no access. Do you know if they're there? Do any of you know, have they given you a certificate that says that they're there?
The asbestos monitoring right now is inside the building.
I say,
because
have you
that's where
seen
the work
it?
is being
Have
done.
you seen it, or has Mr. Whitman seen it?
Well, it's regulated by the state, and it's within, I went into the building, and the rooms that they're working on with the asbestos are completely wrapped in plastic, and I wasn't allowed into the room where they're working, but they monitor according to the state, and it's monitored.
But with what monitoring device is there is what I'm trying to find out, Mayor, because I built houses and I built buildings, and I want to know, for your sake, as well as the kids' sake in our neighborhood and everyone's sake, if in fact those physical devices that monitor these things are there, aside from the wrapping. And I don't know, we can't see it.
Yes, they are there.
We got an update just today on the work. I don't know, and it deals with the asbestos. It's been completed in several areas, and they've submitted the initial results of the air monitoring to the health department, and they were found to be satisfactory.
Wait, Ms. Butler, who gave you this report, Mr. Kaiser or Avalon Bay?
No, it came from the municipality.
Mr. Kaiser.
Yeah, Mr.
Okay,
Kaiser.
I wanted to be
Yeah,
sure,
yeah, yeah.
thank you. I just wanted to be sure it was Mr. Kaiser.
No. So, and Whitman has been on the site regularly, and as have our engineers, and the results, they've been getting it appears from this report that they've been getting the results of the asbestos monitoring, so it is being monitored.
And if you're interested in getting those reports, you can sign up with the engineering department to get those reports emailed to
I'll
you.
do that, and I'll make copies to pass out to other people who have asked me to come speak tonight. So I would do that. The second thing is that there were some questions about the people working with asbestos and their safety, because they are working with it. Have their safeguards been implemented also?
Yes. You know what, the Department of Labor has also been visiting the site,
Good.
So
Are
it
they-
appears that...
And the Board of Health, our inspector, he has personally inspected the materials being used, the equipment being used.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to check. The other thing I'd like to do is ask Mr. Miller a question, and it has to do with you, Mr. Miller, because we're concerned, a lot of us are, that you made a 7-year budget agreement with the university, and we know from the statistics we've seen from the economists that they're only paying 20 to 25% of what they should be paying. And I'm just wondering if you could give us a full report as to how you arrived at those numbers that you agreed to, because I am really more upset with you than I've been with any official in any city I've lived in my life. Nobody makes a 7-year budget agreement with the university that's going wild with what it's doing and saying, well, this is enough. You see all the new buildings they're putting up, the new housing they're putting up. Mr. Miller, this is wrong. And at some point, I would like you to explain to us, not tonight, but in a written form, I would like to see that report as to how you justified this. Because I talked to 7 economists, Stiglitz, Krugman, and 5 others. They all said, what? And I say the same thing. And you should reconsider what you've done. And Mr. Liverman, Ms. Butler, Mr. Simon, Ms. Krumiller, Ms. Howard, and Mayor, you should look at this document. I do believe we are in trouble because those of us are paying high taxes to support this university, and they do what they want as they want. And I'm concerned because Mr. Floyd, our former mayor, told me he's been having trouble getting our ordinances. And Ms. Monzo and the other attorney here, Maddox, we need to get some ordinances, and we need to understand how to control the university's octopus outreach. I taught at this university. I respect it to a degree, but it's a business right now. It's no longer what it was 25 years ago. And we're going to be supporting it. We see all the police holding things. We can't get in and out of the city, and we know they're not paying enough. And you know that. If I paid you taxes commensurate with what they're paying, I could cut my tax bill down to $4,000 instead of $12,000. Or I'm paying $12,000, yeah. I could cut it down to $4,000. Shall I do that? Shall I go to court and say, I'm only going to pay what the university pays? You don't want that, do you, Mr. Miller? No. Nor do you. So I don't want to say any more. I would like a full report, Mr. Miller, from you so we can look at it, and I can send it to some economists, and we can look at what's been going on in Princeton, and that would be useful. Otherwise, we'll have to have a private investigation as to how this was done without proper opportunity for those of us who live in the city to participate in this agreement, because it was done in secret, and we're not happy.
Mr. Hammoud, if you'll furnish me with your email address, I'll be glad to send you.
I will give it to our secretary tonight, and then you'll have it.
And then, could you actually go back to the mic? I'm not sure if you, did you state your name and
Oh, I'm
address,
sorry.
or we can't get it in minutes?
I'm Dr. Samuel Hamid, Hamod. I reside at 282 Witherspoon Street, and I've owned that property since December of 77 or January of 78.
Okay,
And I
thank you.
have been a property owner here during that time, and I've seen our taxes go up extraordinarily. I've also seen the university expand at astronomical ways. And I think we should come to some understanding, both in terms of ordinances to control them and what they're doing, and secondly, to let them pay their fair share. That's all I want.
Okay.
I just want them to pay their fair share.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else from the public who'd like to speak on an item that's not on tonight's agenda? Okay, seeing... Yep, Mr. Simon?
Yeah, actually, I want to respond.
Sorry, I see you.
I wanted to actually make a couple of different comments. The first is, I did want to respond to Dr. Hammoud just briefly and simply note that the university is tax exempt under state law. So the power that he perceives that we have to extract money from the university is severely constrained by state law. And frankly, we attempted to work on an agreement with the university that was as good as we could get for the town and for the residents of the town, subject to the constraints that we have, which include the fact that the university is not obligated to give anything to the town. under state law. And in fact, there are other nonprofit institutions in town that do not provide a single penny for property taxes to the municipality. So I understand that there will always be the opinion that they could be paying more. I disagree with the assertion that we have done anything but work in the best interests of the municipality to the best of our ability. And beyond that, you'll simply have to wait for Council President Miller's report in order to understand a little bit better the process we went through to get there.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Simon. Thank you.
Also, the agreement is probably attached to the minutes at which we accepted the agreement. So I'm not sure what...
No, that's not what I asked. I asked how he arrived at these...
Well, no, you
numbers.
also mentioned that you wanted to see the agreement, and the agreement is public information.
I've already seen that. I want to know how he arrived at these numbers, because, and I disagree with Mr. Simon. They're not going to move Princeton University, Mr. Simon. We had 3 aces in our hand. They had 1. I don't think you know how to negotiate. Be honest with you.
Okay, thank you.
I did have one other comment, and that is the municipal attorney's opinion that was released on June 3rd regarding the municipal council and governing bodies' ability to meet with, for training exercises, also to meet in caucus with the Democratic Party, and specifically also with Sue Nemeth. I've gotten very negative feedback about that memo, and I would strongly urge that we make that memo public so the public can review it openly and we discuss it openly. Just to let people understand what the municipal attorney has told us so far is we can discuss the existence of that memo, and in doing so, obviously, we can discuss elements of the contents, because we have to be able to in order to discuss what it means. And the 2 concerns that people have raised are essentially that it looks like we've mixed municipal business with campaign business and with Democratic Party business, and spent tax dollars, municipal dollars doing it. And people are not happy with that. I think we need to get that memo out there, and I just want to set that on the record.
Okay. Yeah, I have no problem with releasing the memo, and I asked for it in response to conversations we had at the end of, or at the beginning, either the end of last year or the beginning of this year, where there were some questions about what is a caucus. I know we've had discussions. The police department is going to be doing a team building exercise. They talked to council about potentially also us doing a team building exercise. And before we can have the conversation about whether to do those things, I thought it was important for us to understand whether we could legally do them. So, you know, it wasn't binding us to do anything. It was just finding out some answers to some basic questions that had already been raised, I think, that were out there that we needed answers to in order to proceed. So that was the reason behind, yes, Ms. Butler?
Can I ask, Lisa, and I hate to put you on the spot with this, but that a memo, there is attorney-client privilege, and so given that it's the municipal attorney for the entire governing body, what is the process by which we would decide to make that public? Can we just decide amongst ourselves that that's fine with us to make that memo public?
Thank you. I believe the process would be that you would all have to approve it, the release of it as a body, because the client is the council. So without looking at this question, my gut tells me that you'd have to vote on it and either say, yes, we release it, or no, we don't release it, because it's the client's privilege, essentially, to waive or not waive. But I would feel more comfortable just double-checking if that's okay with you, and getting back to you. I can email you.
What I would propose to council is that, I don't think we can vote on it tonight since it wasn't on the agenda, but that if we don't have to vote on it, my inclination would be to just release it, because there's nothing in there that compromises our legal liability on anything. It's not like it's a memo to us about some litigation that we're in. It's really more explanatory about what is a political caucus, what are the rules regarding a political caucus, what would it mean to have a team-building exercise, what are the rules surrounding that, so that we're not in violation of any Open Public Meetings Act regulations. So it's, if we don't need to vote on it, my inclination would be to just release it. But if we do need to vote on it, I'd be happy to put it on the next meeting's agenda.
And it might even be sufficient to do it by motion. So I'll double check just so you know for sure, and then I'll let you know. And if it doesn't need a vote of any sort, then obviously it could be released immediately.
Right, I just would ask, is there anybody who would object to releasing it? Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, I'll ask one last time. I don't think there's anybody else who wanted to speak on items not on the agenda. Okay, then we'll move on to the first ordinance for tonight, which is the landscaping registration ordinance. And we had looked at this before, but one of the changes that has been made was to put in a provision about our wage theft laws. And I'd like to turn it over to Councilwoman Howard, who's been working hard on this issue along with members of the Human Services Commission.
Thanks, Mayor. This is really exciting, and not just because it's happening during a big soccer game, as you'll see when John Howler stands up with his jersey on this evening, but it's actually quite an exciting evening for two reasons, I think. I mean, this is a very important step we're taking in our efforts, in our ongoing efforts to protect the rights and safety of immigrants in the community. And we've been doing a lot of things, and I'm sure everyone has seen the memo that John and I wrote that was in the briefing materials that we wanted to make sure was publicly available so that everyone knew where we were coming from. But this is really an important step now to codify some of the things we've been doing. Secondly, it's important because it's really been a unique collaboration between key government and community partners, and I think really can be a model for other things we can do. And so I'm so proud. We're going to hear shortly from Elisa Nera, our Human Services Director, John Hollner, who chairs the Immigration Subcommittee on Human Services, Craig Garcia, who is from New Labor, an organization based in New Brunswick, who has really been an incredible thought partner in helping us think about how to approach this. And we've also been collaborating with LawDef and the police department. So it's really been a comprehensive approach to thinking about what can we do to address and prevent wage theft. And so it really does complement the other work we've been doing on the HSC, which we're going to hear about from Elisa, to make this town as welcoming as it can be to the immigrant community. But it really steps up our enforcement and education efforts to address wage theft, which is a pernicious practice that unfortunately we believe is happening in Princeton. And we're going to hear a little bit from Craig about where it happens and why. So what's exciting tonight is that it's our first stab at codifying some of these protections in this landscaping ordinance. Then we want to look to other ways to do so, whether it's hopefully the restaurant inspection license, maybe some construction ordinances, anywhere where we think we can affect the employer community where this may be happening, where we can protect workers' rights. We're going to be looking to codify some of these protections. So it's really exciting tonight, but I want to especially applaud our colleagues for working so hard on this. And then Bob Huff is not here, but I don't think he thought his landscaping ordinance was going to become a wage theft ordinance, and he could not have been more of a trooper as we worked with him on this as well. So Kathy, if you could let him know too that we really appreciated his willingness to work with us on he lives in the world of leaf and brush, and then was very open to seeing this as an avenue for these important human rights protections. So I don't want to say much more because I think the memo that we wrote says a lot of it, and I hope we will allow public comment because I think we do have some tremendous partners who've worked really hard here to tell us more about it.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else from council who'd like to speak to this ordinance at this time?
I simply wanted to thank Councilwoman Howard and John Heilner for the memo that you sent us describing the changes to this ordinance. I think they're excellent changes, and I really appreciate the work that both of you have put into this to bring it before us. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
So is there a motion to introduce, and then we can open it up to comments? It's moved by Ms. Howard and seconded by Mr. Miller. Madam Clerk, please read the roll. I'm sorry, wait, we're not going to vote on it yet. Sorry, I got overexcited. I wanted to open it up to anybody who'd like to speak to this ordinance at this time. Yeah, Mr. Heilner.
And do note that his dedication, he is leaving in the middle of a very important World Cup game to be here to talk about this. Yes, but we will not mention.
Yeah, so the good news is the U.S. was up 1-0 at halftime. Got to keep our priorities right here. Well, we all know that low-income workers, many of whom are immigrants, are employed really in all our service jobs here in Princeton. And I would like to stress that most employers, including landscapers, do not engage in wage theft. But a few do try to cut corners and take advantage of low-income workers, especially those who are not citizens or permanent residents. And Chief Sutter has said on a couple of occasions that Princeton had about 10 wage theft cases over the past 12 months, and some of them were by landscapers. So as Councilwoman Howard mentioned, this is really just a start in the landscaping industry, if you will. We also know that wage theft is way underreported, and I think Mr. Garcia will talk about that a little more. But the reason it's underreported is that the folks who are potential victims of wage theft are often in fear of losing their jobs, or if they happen to be undocumented, in fear of being, or they get threats of being turned into ICE, the federal agency that deports people. And of course, as you probably know, all the existing wage theft laws on both the federal and state levels do not discriminate between citizens, residents, permanent residents, undocumented people. The law is there will be no wage theft. So the main purpose of this ordinance is to deter wage theft and also help ensure that landscapers have proper workman's compensation insurance. The wage and hour regulations and workman's comp are already required by federal and New Jersey state laws. And what this ordinance will do is really serve as a very strong reminder that here in Princeton we take these laws very seriously, and we hope it will help deter wage theft. The workman's compensation part, which is also in the ordinance, really protects landscapers themselves and also protects homeowners, businesses, and of course the workers who are on the job. Finally, I would just say that the ordinance really is the best approach we could find at this point in time, because what it does is it requires the landscapers, when they register, which they are required to do, to acknowledge that they've received information about the wage and hour laws and that they know about workers' compensation. So again, the main purpose is to get this acknowledgement checked off on the registration and just send a very strong message that we really do care here in Princeton. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on this? Yeah. Oh, and that was John Heilner, for the record.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to add a few thoughts. Elisa Neira, Human Services. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the work that the Police Department and Human Services has done in organizations like LoudDeaf and New Labor. Here? Okay. And since last year, we've come together to develop a streamlined process on how to treat wage theft. And since then, we have an intake system that really helps us to better assist individuals who come to our offices asking for help. And it's been quite successful, and we're very happy that we've been able to actually help people to recover their wages. I think this proposed ordinance, I think it's going to really complement the efforts that we've made through the Human Services Commission, the Police Department, and partners like New Labor and LoudDeaf to really, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, to really show our commitment to immigrant rights and also strengthen the police and the community relations. And then the last thing, I just wanted to also thank Bob Huff for his support and really open-mindedness I can't speak tonight, I'm really sorry, for really helping us revise this ordinance and just being a team player. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Craig Garcia, 52 Birch Avenue. I wanted to point out that I live in Princeton. I'm very proud of the leadership I've seen from the community and the government here on this project. Heather Howards has done a great job of leading this. John Highlander, it's just been amazing, the kind of attention that's been given. Elisa and Nick Sutter, too. I actually had the opportunity to do a training with Princeton's police force, which I work out of New Brunswick with an organization called New Labor, and I've been trying to get a meeting with the police force there for a very long time, and it was amazingly easily done here, and it's just the attention the town has given to this it's truly commendable. So last year I worked with my organization New Labor, which is an immigrant worker organization based out of New Brunswick. We also have an office in Newark and Lakewood, on what was New Jersey's first wage theft ordinance, and that was in New Brunswick. And the idea of it is something very similar to what we're doing here, is that it tied business licenses there to proper adherence to wage and hour guidelines, meaning that if there was a judgment against an employer for not paying what they owed an employee, whether it be through the DOL process, the Department of Labor process, or through the court process, if they were found to owe money and they didn't pay it back, they could lose their license. We're trying to do something similar here with the landscaping license, and why I think landscaping is very important here is because, in my experience, I work with a lot of day laborers or jornaleros in New Brunswick. A lot of them do come down and do work here in Princeton. We've had quite a number of cases in the past of workers having done work with contractors where they weren't paid what they're owed. So having a town like Princeton take the initiative and making this big step towards passing an ordinance that incorporates anti-wage theft, element, would send a big message to contractors that don't do the right thing. And it is a major problem throughout the country. It's unfortunately a major problem for low-wage workers, where they either don't get paid the minimum wage or they don't get paid overtime. This would provide an important protection for them. Last year alone, New Labor, in just our New Brunswick office, we collected $160,000 in unpaid wages, and that's literally just scratching the surface of what's just going on in that one town. So if you think it sounds like a minor ordinance of what we're doing here, it's not. It'll have major repercussions and send a message that we need to pay our workers, we need to do just the right thing. Paying the minimum wage, paying overtime, it's the law, and by passing this ordinance, I think we'll send a clear message to employers. Also, I want to say the aim is not to shut down anyone's business or really attack them. It's supposed to prevent people from making the poor decision of not paying the workers. Since we've passed the wage theft ordinance in New Brunswick, we've had an excellent ability to collect unpaid wages than we've had in the past. We've just been able to show folks the ordinance, and even before going through the whole legal process, we say, listen, if you don't pay, there's a threat that you won't be able to operate your business here. And many times that's been enough. I mean, I've been able to collect $10,000 in one shot by mentioning this ordinance. So it really does have a powerful effect, and I think it'll really take Princeton in the right direction as far as immigrant rights, as far as low-wage workers' rights. So I'm really excited about it. And finally, I mentioned I lived on 52 Birch Avenue. There's a lot of contractors that live on that street as well, and I know some of them, and I happen to know they're good contractors. And I think one of the important side effects of this ordinance will be to promote good local employers, which is really great, because the guys that live on my block use folks that live in this town, and I know they do the right thing. It's usually the fly-by-night operations that come in from God knows where, and leave their workers behind, and maybe have them fight to find their way home, that are the troublemakers. The people here in town will understand this ordinance. They'll understand why it benefits them and their workers and our entire community. So I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Levin?
Thank you so much. I just want to clarify, unless an employee speaks up or says something, we don't know if it's wage theft. So is there a way that we can, I don't know how this works, but kind of promote this by letting the employees know? And
It's a great question, Lance, because that is the concern, is that you want workers to feel comfortable coming forward. So some of this, of course, is us just creating a climate in which people do feel safe coming forward. But more than that, Elisa is planning several information sessions at, there's been a continuing partnership at St. Paul's Church to get the word out to people. And then this new intake form that Elisa talked about has been really nice, because people come to the municipality in different ways. Some people come to might recognize it's a police matter. Some might know Elisa and feel comfortable coming to her. So standardizing and coordinating how we take in complaints has been really important, I think, creating a welcoming face. But we definitely recognize that this is not the end, that there's got to be education, that there's an education component that's really important.
Thank you. Ms. Butler?
Yeah, not to put anybody on the spot tonight, but if we have a sense of how many people have come through this intake, and actually then the dollar amount on the wages, the amount that we're talking about, you don't have to answer it tonight, but I'd like to see that if you have that information.
Well, it's actually, John and Chief Sutter had a great email exchange over the weekend, actually, about creating a reporting format for us to be able to track all this, so, in which Nick was excited about. So I think going forward, we do want to formalize that, because it'll be that much more helpful to know and to check patterns. But, already I've heard that the Safe Neighborhoods Unit has gotten complaints, and fortunately, they've been able to go out and, apparently it's pretty effective when a police officer goes out and visits a work site and says, did you forget to pay? And the person says, oh yeah, I forgot to pay, here's the money. This just gives more teeth to that. And so, which I don't, but Craig, do you want to speak to can you speak to the education? Do you have any tips for us on how we can educate the community and make sure workers know that they can come forward?
Sure. Well, actually, one of the things I've been working with Elisa on is having new labor members, because it's a membership-based organization, folks who are also day laborers, come out and do trainings with folks here in Princeton, ranging from wage theft and how to protect themselves against wage theft and how to report it, and also health and safety trainings on the job. So we're going to try to run the whole gamut of workers' rights with them to get them informed, to come forward and talk about this a little bit more. But I think the education thing is by and far the most essential piece. This ordinance will do nothing unless there's education to it. So letting workers know what their rights are and how to move forward and know that there are resources here in town to help them out.
Craig, isn't it part of the education too? You've been instructing workers on how to, for example, this is such a neat idea, how to take a picture on their phone of the license plate of the person who may pick you up to go work, because sometimes the problem has been, a guy named Jerry, pick me up, and it's hard to find who the employer is, right? So, is that an example of the
When we see the worst of employers, it's usually some guy who shows up with a U-Haul truck and gives a first name and maybe a cell phone number. In New Brunswick, we've had about 14 years of experience in town, so a lot of the workers there do know about our work and what we do, and generally folks do try to get as much information as they can about the employer. Sometimes it's obviously more challenging than others, but people do over time learn to make sure they get that information.
You mentioned that New Labor is a membership organization. Does the municipality join? Do individual people join? Who joins?
Workers do, but we take donations. It's a worker-based organization. Anyone is welcome to join. It's $100 a year and includes English classes. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Two things I completely forgot to mention. One is just on the education issue, while we're on that. Elisa and I and Craig have been developing a very simple little booklet that we would hand these out free to workers, and they would basically have in the booklet the key things that they have a right to, key telephone numbers like the police, the hospital, the community clinic, and so on, and then sort of a little very simple log of where they worked and how long and how much they were told they would be paid. So we'll have a worker tool, if you will, that way. The other thing I should mention is that I think this whole effort really plays into the work that Chief Sutter started really he was working on it last summer, but it came out last September. And that's the new police directive, which is envisioned, or its objective is to make immigrants in Princeton feel much more comfortable about being here and about the fact that the police job is not to help federal agencies pick them up and deport them. The police job is Princeton public safety. So that effort started, 9 months ago, and now this is one more effort, and it all kind of builds together to make people more comfortable in coming forward and talking about their wage theft problems.
Thank you. Yes, Linda?
Hi, I'm addressing this to Elisa and the other gentleman. For a number of years, I worked as a waitress in town. I was threatened with losing my job. I speak Spanish. If an accident occurred on the job, most of the people I worked with at the time, this was in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, had, phony Social Security numbers. They may have been on the workers' comp policy. But I was threatened with the loss of my job if I told any doctor or nurse that this accident happened to the worker when I accompanied them to the emergency room on the job. So, and even Americans can be threatened with losing their jobs if their employer says, we don't want our workers' comp rates to go up, so you just say this happened at home or something. So it can happen to American citizens, people like me too. The other thing was there are a lot of private homeowners who grab guys off the street, a couple of wealthy people down Mercer Road. I got Maria Huega involved from LALDEF about 4 or 5 years ago, and one particular gentleman who defrauded 8 men who had worked on reconstructing his basement. This happens also a lot in construction. The other thing is to keep an eye out in hospitals, maybe to hand out pamphlets in hospitals where people feel entitled to identify their employers and not to be saying that an accident, if they were brought by ambulance, happened at home. Because I've seen that. They're really afraid to come forward about that. They think they're just going to be picked up out of the emergency room and deported. Really frightened about it.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
Get the address of, if you're working in a private home, get the address of the home, maybe the owner of the home's license plate, something like that. I don't know whether that's included in your pamphlets.
Good ideas, thank you.
Thank you. My sense is that there's a lot of consensus up here for at least the introduction of this ordinance. Madam Clerk, please call the roll. Yeah, Ms. Butler, okay.
Now call.
Okay,
Call the roll.
please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Cramiller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Simon?
Yes.
Great. And the public hearing for this ordinance is going to be on July 14th. And I just wanted to extend my thanks again to New Labor for coming tonight, to everybody on the Human Services Commission, especially John Heilner, to Elisa Niera, the director, to Bob Huff, Chief Sutter, and especially to Heather Howard for seeing this through. I think that, it's, when we think about who we are as a town, our laws say a lot about who we are, and it's important to have laws on the books that reflect our values, and I think this is a really shining example of that. So we still need to vote on it, and we'll be doing that on July 14th. So I invite everybody who's interested to come back then. Okay, the next ordinance for tonight is an ordinance by Princeton concerning trees and shrubs and the Princeton Shade Tree Commission, and amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974, and the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. And for this, I'd like to turn it over to our arborist, Greg O'Neill. Oh, and also the new assistant, I want to get your title right.
Assistant Director,
Superintendent of Public Works.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening to ladies and gentlemen of council. If we just get the PowerPoint presentation up on the big screen, please. Thank you, Mr. Berry. This evening, on behalf of the Princeton Shade Tree Commission, we would like to introduce an ordinance concerning trees and shrubs and the functions of the Shade Tree Commission. Our presentation will be dealing solely with the substantive issues of the proposed ordinance. And with that in mind, we'll begin with Article 3, relating to public property. This article maintains control over public rights-of-way and public property, while at the same time allowing for activity in these areas with written permission from the municipality. In Article 4, we'll be dealing with issues with private property. The permit requirements. The ordinance will be designated by trees with a diameter shoulder height of 8 inches or greater. We labored over this number through multiple meetings, and the ultimate answer was found in the American Nurseryman Standard. The largest transplantable tree in the nursery industry is 8 inches in caliber. So it was felt that trees that could be replaced were not going to be the triggering mechanism for this. It was trees that were above and beyond that point. Evergreen and ornamental trees of 10 feet in height or greater. These are trees that have established themselves, and they're probably about a third of the way through their lifespan. And so we feel the protection of these is vitally important, because ornamental trees normally only have a lifespan of 25 to 30 years. Trees extending into the right-of-way. This has a dual effect. First of all, it protects our streetscape, because these trees are now forming a tunnel-type effect over the roadways, causing cooling, and more importantly, a traffic calming facet comes into play here. If people are driving on a wide open area, highway, anything like that, they tend to increase their speed. If they're in an area which has that tunneling effect, the speed has been documented to decrease in those streets. And we also need to deal with our specimen or significant trees, both of which are defined in Section 22-2, both I and J. A significant trees is a tree or grove of trees recognized as significant by specimen quality, historical significance, location, size, or other unique characteristics. A specimen tree shall be any tree at least 80% of the size of the trees listed in the champion tree register. This is that actual register here, in case anybody is interested in taking a look. It denotes all the trees, all the species of trees throughout the state of New Jersey that are the biggest trees, the champion trees. And these would be our gauge for that 80%. And there will be a $25 fee for the permit to cover administrative costs. We have two examples here of the 8-inch diameter tree and the 10-inch tree. I'm sorry, 10-foot tree. Our first is one of the trees, a Japanese tree lilac, located at the Monument Hall. This tree is about 12 feet in height. So as you can see right along this spot here, that will be your 10-foot designation. This is a ruby red horse chestnut, also located at Monument Hall. If you look at this wall right here, that's 8 feet in height. So if we bring that across, you have about 8 feet there, about 16, 24. So you're roughly 30 feet in height here. The 8-inch diameter or caliper designation is at 4.5 feet above grade level. The exceptions to the ordinance will be to abate imminent danger, fallen trees due to natural causes, meaning wind throw, heavy ice storms, snow and ice loads which caused uprooting, just certainly not the bulldozer driver who made a mistake. Dead or substantially diseased trees. The mechanism that triggers that would be a 50% death of the canopy of the tree. So if the tree is half dead, that's when we look at that becoming an exception. Planning or zoning board applications regarding land development. These are an exception, however, the Shade Tree Commission is allowed to provide comment on those applications. Historic zoning preservation districts, and the New Jersey Farmland Assessment Act. The New Jersey Farmland Assessment Act covers a lot of ground. In regards to this ordinance, it will be strictly for woodlot management. Now, off to the permit application. We're going to require a narrative including the list of the trees to be removed, the reason or reasons for removal, description of a tree replacement plan. I'll be delving into the tree replacement plan in just a couple of slides. Now, the actual plan that we're going to be looking for will denote the location and size of the lot, all structures and appurtenances located on the lot, the identity and location of the trees to be removed, and the location of streams and wetlands. This is a very important point here with the streams and the wetlands. The Department of Environmental Protection has designated streams throughout the state of New Jersey, classifying them anywhere from C1 to C3. The C1 classification allows for a 300-foot buffer to that stream, even if it's a tributary to a larger stream. And what that does, it just protects from erosion and the riparian buffer zones. And the type and location of the trees to be planted. Now, we can go into this a little bit further here with the tree replacement plan. We're going to be asking for a 1-to-1 ratio. The 1-to-1 ratio will be according, once again, to industry standards. Industry standards for a replacement tree would be a 2 to 2.5 inch caliper. Payment to the Shade Tree Trust Reserve. This is an item that, once again, was labored over for many, many meetings. And what is felt here is that with the loss of our canopy cover in the past 4.5 years, our percentage has probably dropped significantly. In the Environmental Resource Inventory of January 2010, it had Princeton as a whole at 43%. That's very good canopy coverage. That was in January 2010. March of 2010, the same year, 3 months later, we had a vicious windstorm come through Princeton and southern Montgomery, knocking down literally tens of thousands of trees. We still have areas, 8 to 10 acres, filled 500, 600, 700 trees laying on their sides. So that was a significant storm. We've had, since then, Irene. We've had our good friend Sandy, who took a lot of trees. And in that time frame, we've also dealt with an awful lot of smaller storms where we lose a dozen trees, where we lose 20 trees, where we lose 23 trees. Those have added up, again, to a significant number. The Shade Tree Trust Reserve is designed to allow people to pay for, if they can't plant on their property, to pay into a fund the same amount that a replacement tree would cost, and then the municipality has the opportunity to use municipal lands and rights of way to plant trees on those. There is a bit of a catch to this. If the replanting is not feasible on the property, the plan might not be required at the enforcement officer's discretion. Now, this doesn't mean that you're just getting off scot-free. What would be presented to the applicant would be the 1-to-1 ratio and the payment into the Shade Tree Trust Reserve. And along with the same explanation that I just gave all of you. With our canopy cover diminishing, with development, with all these things occurring, we're starting to lose what Princeton is really known for. We're one of the main, I'm sorry, not what it's, but one of the main things that it's known for, and that is its old growth trees. We're also going to require a notification to contiguous properties. This can be done through whatever methodology the applicant chooses. It could be social media, it could be the mail, it could be face-to-face conversations, it could be over the phone. However they want to notify them, that's fine. There will be a checkbox on the application saying that, yes, my neighbors do know about this. This will cut down on a number of things. It will cut down, one, on multiple phone calls that come into my office whenever trees are coming down. At least people are aware of it. It also puts in the mindset that, yes, this does affect neighboring properties, which in turn affects the whole community. So if we control the contiguous properties, we have control over the canopy cover of the entire municipality. With appeals, these would deal with when a permit is denied or it's only partially approved. The first step, even though it is not mandated, it is recommended that the applicant go to the Shade Tree Commission to try to find a viable solution. However, if the applicant does not want to deal with the Shade Tree Commission, they can go directly to Mayor and Council. Now, if this step is taken where the Shade Tree Commission is not utilized and it goes directly to Mayor and Council, this is a final and binding decision that Mayor and Council will make. That normally brings the applicant directly to the Shade Tree Commission, and I don't believe that we've ever had an instance where it's gone to Mayor and Council, because the Shade Tree Commissions have always been a very, very workable group. Violations. Should we have a violation, someone doesn't get a permit, someone removes additional trees that they weren't supposed to, they can go through the informal complaint process. My office will be issuing a recommendation as to what a replacement value would be on the tree which was destroyed or removed illegally, and it will also be given to the Shade Tree Commission. Shade Tree Commission will have the opportunity to review that, and then the applicant may come in and state their case. The second step, if that is not accepted by the applicant and the recommendation of the Shade Tree Commission, then we would go to adjudication in municipal court. Finally, our contractor registration. Ms. Howard, you put a whole lot of thoughts in my head this evening. Thank you very much for that. We're going to be charging a $50 annual fee for people to work in the arboricultural industry in Princeton. At that time, they will receive a copy of the ordinance, and they will have it explained to them. We'll be asked, do you have any questions? And they will, at that point, have to be in compliance. Should there be a problem with the contractor, and it was an instance where the applicant might not have been responsible for the contractor's actions, their registration can be suspended and or revoked. And if the owner of the property himself or herself are doing the work themselves on the property, then there is no registration required. However, they do have to go through the full permit process. At this time, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Mr. Limerick?
Yeah. The payment into the Shade Tree Trust Fund, does that vary depending on what trees that are cut down, or?
Yes, Mr. Liverman. What the initial suggestion would be, normally a 2.5 inch caliper tree, that would cost probably about $200 to replace. So that would be a recommendation. However, it is not a binding recommendation. If the applicant is saying, I don't have the money, okay, can I give you $50? Yes, we would accept that as payment for that tree.
Thank you.
Ms. Cornell?
Well, I just wanted to make a little, just clarification on the notice, which the notice requirement was something that the borough had before and the township didn't. But I think you can't email. I think you have to do it by hand delivery or mail. Just in case, it sounded like you could do it by email or something.
Yeah, I know that we were relaxing the requirements at one point because we were asking for certified mail or face-to-face.
Right, that's what we did.
contact.
It's easier than it was in the borough, but harder than it was in the township.
Yeah, so we met in the middle.
But it could be by regular mail, it doesn't have to be by certified mail, and there's no requirement for proof of delivery, because that was a big concern from some of the members from the Shade Tree Commission about essentially proving that the neighbor actually received a copy, but instead the recommendation is that the onus is on the applicant to prove that he or she sent it by regular or certified mail, or had it hand-delivered, and then the responsibility would end at that point as a compromise.
I had a question. I know you're talking about in the previous ordinance about getting the word out, and I think it's outlined in here, the communication to the contractors, but if someone's going to, hire their cousin to take down their tree or try to do it themselves, there's a lot in this ordinance, and I don't know if the Shade Tree Commission has talked about it, or if you had ideas about how to break this down so that people aren't unknowingly breaking the law. And then, their neighbor gets upset and suddenly they're facing a fine. So has there been discussion about that? I'll ask first. And what was the thinking about how to get the word out?
We have discussed that, Mayor Lampert. What we are planning on doing is a number of things. First and foremost, this ordinance will pertain to the contractors primarily. They're the ones going to be interested in it because they're the ones going to have to follow it. And one of the best things that we did when the initial ordinance came out was we sat down with contractors, we gave them 3 meeting dates, come on by, we did a PowerPoint presentation of them on the substantive aspects of the ordinance, and it does take a little bit, there's a learning curve here, and it'll take a little bit of time. However, this ordinance is not as difficult in its understanding as previous ordinances have been. In the former township, we had percentages, we had between 8 and 16 inches in caliper, and that became confusing, especially to the applicants, the homeowners themselves, because it was very difficult to understand. So if we get the message across to the contractors, and one of the things I always recommend is have your contractor submit the permit. They will truly understand it at that point, because the 8-inch caliper trigger is a whole lot easier to understand and to communicate to people. I think we're also looking at, we have a very active Shade Tree Commission, very proud to serve with them. I would be willing to bet they would spend many hours getting this word out. We'll certainly have it on the website, TV 30. We'll take advantage of whatever we can. I know that we're looking at the local newspapers, and these are all items that I think will get the message out there to people. We can also, as people buy and sell homes in the area, in the municipality, they can also, when they send the welcome packages to them, that can be part of it, letting people know what's going on.
But I guess the simple message is if you're going to take down any tree on your property that's 8 inches at shoulder height or more, you're going to need a permit for that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Ms. Kremiller?
Yes, and just in case I'm curious about if that sounds draconian or strict. First I want to, in case the person's watching, a person, before we started looking at the ordinances, looked up 50 shade tree ordinances and copied them from other ordinances in New Jersey and sent them to me, and the person wants to remain anonymous, but I want to thank that person. But some of the members of our Shade Tree Commission looked through all of those ordinances, and our ordinance is actually a happy medium, I think, in terms of protecting trees and protecting property rights, just in case you were wondering.
And just to add on to that thought, Mayor, Princeton is a very unique community in that they have a municipal arborist. Most communities do not. I know that in Bridgewater, in my community, they have something very similar to the former township's ordinance. I actually helped them write it, but they have no enforcement mechanism. So trees come down to town all the time, and nothing is being done. So A lot of the ordinances that were submitted also were dealing with land use codes and planning applications, zoning applications. So those at least have an enforcement mechanism because you have your planning and zoning boards. However, just the simple communities, I know of myself and two other communities, Maplewood and Paramus, that have full-time municipal arborists. And that's all that I know of, the 565 communities.
Yeah, great. No, I think we're certainly lucky to have a municipal arborist, and I didn't mean my question to imply that. I didn't think this was a good idea, but I think that it's a lot of information, like reading through it, you just don't want people to be unwillingly or unknowingly violating it. So, but we have a very active Shade Tree Commission, and I think, for a lot of these ordinances, getting the word out is going to be just as important almost as having the right laws on the book.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea for the Shade Tree Commission to discuss further.
Mr. Miller and then Ms. Butler.
Question, Greg. How is the 1-to-1 ratio applied? Is it applied in a manner such that if I take down an 8-inch diameter tree, I can replace it with a 2.5-inch diameter tree? Or is it applied such that I have to put in a sufficient number of 2.5-inch diameter trees to match the diameter of the tree that I've taken down?
Yeah, it is just the 1-to-1 ratio, where if you take down an 8-inch caliper tree, a 2.5-inch caliper tree will be sufficient. However, we do encourage people to plant trees which are a little bit bigger than that. The mortality rate between a 2 to 2.5-inch caliper tree and a 3 to 3.5-inch caliper tree is not significantly different. So we try to get bigger trees planted, and that is actually something that people are very receptive of. I've been doing this with a number of applications as of late. I've been speaking to people about replanting, and there were, on this application, 7 trees were being removed in the front of the property. And at that point in time, I asked the applicant, I said, would you be willing to replant them? And they said, oh, yes, we'd be happy to do that. And they said, well, we want to plant smaller trees. They were taking down larger trees. And so I asked them, would you be willing to replant on a 2-for-1 basis if you're planting ornamental trees? And they said, absolutely, we'll put the 14 trees in because they had the space to do it. So as a tool of communication, and that's what this ordinance is really going to be utilized as, I think it can be very successful as long as we are presenting it correctly to the public and we are working with the public so they know that this is for the betterment of the community.
And is there any requirement that the individual who's planting trees to replace one that's taken down maintain those trees for a specific period of time? In other words, I take down an 8-inch diameter tree, I replace it with a 2.5 or 3-inch diameter tree, and a year later, because I don't pay enough attention to the tree is dead. What happens then?
That's one of the things that we advise people. Now, industry standard is a 1-year period for the replant. That would be the guarantee period. If the tree dies during that time or significantly dies or is diseased, then it's replaced. What I recommend to people is get a 2-year guarantee because, quite frankly, a 1-year time frame is not enough. It usually someplace around the 18 to 24-month range is when these trees start fizzling out. So if you get the 2-year guarantee period on it, that would function much better.
May I ask a question specifically on that topic? So if a developer plants the tree and then sells the property, who's responsible, the developer or the new owner?
Upon certificate of occupancy, it becomes the owner's responsibility.
Okay, I mean, you see where I'm going with this, right? If the developer does a poor job planting the trees, the new owner may get saddled with a bill.
Yeah, now one of the things that we have, and this is as long as site work is taking place, meaning that there's heavy grading work, if it's tear down, rebuild, anything like that, that triggers myself into the engineering department process, and I actually go around and inspect these properties prior to the CO being granted. They will be granted a temporary certificate of occupancy prior to that, but if I go around and I see trees that are not properly planted, there's only been a handful of examples, to be honest with you, because the developers have worked well with us in these ordinances, then they would be required to remove and replace them.
Ms. Butler, did you have a question?
I was just going to comment on your point, your concern that homeowners might inadvertently break the law by starting to take down these trees, but they are pretty substantial trees, and it's, you know, somebody who feels qualified to go in and start cutting down trees on their own property this size would probably have some knowledge of it. I mean, I just don't think people are inadvertently going to do this, and contractors, you would really need a contractor to take down the size of trees we're talking about. So,
Yeah, and as was stated earlier, there are fly-by-night contractors out there. However, we've developed these ordinances, and it has provided significant control over that. I can only, the ordinance from the former township was probably 12 years in use at this point, and I remember only having to chase out a couple of contractors in that time frame. So you do have, for the most part, you have that 98%. It's that 2% that really causes the problem.
I just wanted to follow up on the question Council President Miller had about, replacing the 8-inch tree with the 2-inch tree, and you were saying it was actually better to maybe replant with a 3-inch tree. Do you need that? I mean, would the ordinance be better if the size of if we put something in there about the minimum size of the replacement tree? Would that give you, better ability to enforce it as opposed to just recommending it to people? Or is it too constraining on the other end?
A lot of what we did, and I state that, the attrition rate between 2 to 2.5 to 3 to 3.5, there's not much difference there. There is a significant difference in price, though. So that would be one issue. But we also, we wanted to formulate this ordinance based a lot on industry standards, the criteria of the industry standards. And the 2 to 2.5-inch caliper, that is the industry standard. That's where a lot more trees are located in the nurseries themselves. So that's what they're pushing out the door, and that's kind of where we landed with that thought.
Okay. I had just a couple questions that were brought up by Grace Sinden, who I know had helped with the original township ordinance, and a lot of them had to do with the amount of time we were giving you and different agencies to respond to when requests came up. So the first one was under section 22-14, review of application, where it gives the enforcement officer 15 days. And I think we might just want to put in there just to clarify business days, so it gives you 3 weeks, because it
actually says that, Mayor.
It does?
It's actually 15
all right. I was
business
maybe looking at a
days
different part.
in section 22-14A.
I'll take your word for it.
It says...
15 business days, sorry.
Lisa got the memo. Do you want her to just go through it? Because she got Grace's questions?
Well, I think...
No?
You can if you want. I mean, do you want to get them? I mean, some of them are more just, I think more just semantic about adding Princeton, and I don't think we need to wordsmith it like that.
Okay.
There are a couple, and then the other one that concerned me, and I know you said it was very unlikely for someone to come to want to have this adjudicated before council, but in the case that does happen, I just want to make sure that we're able to respond. And I do worry about having a 30-day period, because on other issues, when we've tried to schedule a meeting of council, I mean, certainly we have full agendas, and so, I wouldn't want to bump things that were, on our agenda that were time-sensitive for something like this, where you don't know how long it's going to take, so we'd probably need a special meeting, and to get everybody together could be difficult, and I wouldn't want to then, if somebody wants to come to council and then we can't meet, to then, have a problem. So I would maybe argue to extend that to 45 days unless there was a reasoning behind the 30 days.
Yeah, I don't see an issue with extending that to 45 days, Mayor.
Okay.
I would agree. And I can ask the Shade Tree members if that was discussed, and if they have any problem with that. I would like to have just the courtesy of since they work so hard on this.
Okay. And I would encourage anybody who wants to adjudicate to go to the Shade Tree Commission, because it seems like they're the better group anyway, so, hopefully that will be the route that's taken. The other point that Grace made, and I don't know if this is in the ordinance or not, but she was asking for some language maybe at the top of the ordinance that laid out that as the local municipality, we have the power to do something stronger than state law. Is that needed?
No, because the municipality has the authority by the legislature to the extent that it has a shade tree commission to regulate trees on public property, and under its police powers to impose regulations affecting trees on private property. So that is well developed under statutory and case law. So I would say that's what gives the municipality the authority. Other than that, I don't think any further statement is necessary.
Okay. That's fine. I thought it was important to respond to. Did you have a question?
I had several questions, actually, and this is the first time we're really seriously looking at this, so I apologize if the Shade Tree Commission and people are very familiar with this. But let me just start with the first one, which is the right-of-way onto private property. How far does that extend onto people's property from the curb on most streets? Do we know? Is it...
Municipal rights-of-way vary. Normally, it's 50 feet. That measurement is from the center of the road, 25 feet in both directions. We do have municipal rights-of-ways that are 100 feet. We have 66 feet, we have 33 1/3 feet, so it varies, but primarily it's a 50-foot designation.
Okay, well, the reason I ask is coming back to the mayor's question earlier, this seems like a potential example where somebody could unknowingly violate the law if they simply plant on their side of the sidewalk. On the home side of the sidewalk, they're still in the right-of-way, and I'm aware of, just in my neighborhood, several hedges that are, they're not over the sidewalk, but they come up to the sidewalk. Right. And I've seen people plant new gardens, and if they put small bushes in, it seems like they're violating the law, and they're certainly not violating the spirit of it. So it almost seems like we should have some kind of exception for that, where if the municipality needs to use the right-of-way, they certainly have the right to require the homeowner to remove the trees or shrubs, but that we wouldn't interfere with. I'm not quite sure how to word this in the ordinance, but to allow people to plant bushes essentially on their side of the sidewalk, even if it's in the right-of-way.
Yeah, and with previous engineering applications, when we've run into that a few times. We have worked with the owners and say to them, the sidewalk's going in here, so we need to move this. Sometimes it's removal of that. However, because of the funding in the project, we have the ability to replace. And a lot of times at that point, we say, why don't we plant some trees instead of these shrubs? We'll put them right on the right-of-way line, and that will be sufficient cover for you. It'll look great. And so we actually can make a positive out of this potential negative.
Well, and I understand that. I'm more considering not so much somebody who's coming with an application before the planning board or zoning board, but a gardener who is expanding their garden and simply, unknowing about this ordinance or regulation, says, hey, I want to put something in my front yard, either for privacy or just to look good. And it seems like we ought to find some way to accommodate that. And technically, they have to apply, and it seems like something that many citizens are simply not going to know they have to do.
Right. Yeah, that's something I think we can look into.
I mean, I think that the reality is that that's already, that already happens. I mean, we've had these regulations, and people do plant on their side of the sidewalk all the time. I mean, are you worried about people who are just uber law-abiding and would find out their property line is pretty far back?
That or capricious enforcement. If it's routinely not enforced, but then it's occasionally enforced, that would certainly potentially tick off somebody who
yeah, because I do think it's a problem that people don't realize where their right-of-way lines are, because I think a lot of people don't, and they do go farther back into their property.
Well, and ideally, I think this could be an opportunity, if the Shade Tree Commission can take it on, is to educate people, because I think the dangerous thing about investing a lot of money in planting in the right-of-way is that since it's not technically yours, and, especially if you live on a street maybe that doesn't have a sidewalk, and then there's a project that comes in when a sidewalk is put in and the road is expanding into that part of the right-of-way, and you've made this investment in this beautiful garden, that can be really difficult. So to just let people know that if you're going to plant, to try to make sure it's all on your property.
Well, that you're doing it at your own risk. I mean, people do, when they buy a house, they get their deed, and they should know that. I mean, it seems kind of self-explanatory when you get when you get your property.
I think that there might be a lack of understanding as to what a municipal right-of-way is, and I think that's where the educational aspect would really need to stem from. Once people start getting that word out, that there are certain things that the municipality can come through and utilize this section of your front yard for the sidewalk, for the new water line, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that would be a good place to start. I can give an example of on Terhune Road by Governor's Lane, a resident planted between the sidewalk and the curb some of the most beautiful herbaceous plants you're ever going to see in your life. And they are beautiful. And it's a great asset to the roadway and to the community itself. However, somebody called me up one day and said, hey, the problem is my kid rides his bicycle up and down that street, and some of those plants are taller than him. And so at that point, I went and spoke with the resident. I explained to her, there's a beautiful planting you've done here. We're very happy about it. However, we do have a safety concern. The following day, she was out there, she removed those tall plants, and then she revamped her entire planting scheme the following season, so it's all lower growing shrubbery. So yes, as a tool of communication, I think it is something that we can work with.
Mr. Mayor?
There's an example of how we did handle that in the former township when we put in the sidewalk on Snowden Lane. And many of the homeowners on Snowden Lane had plantings that went into the municipal right-of-way. And in some cases, we moved the sidewalk location so that it went around mature trees. And in other cases, we worked with the homeowner, the engineering department worked with the homeowner to reestablish the appropriate location for the plantings that were in the right-of-way. It's not something that occurs frequently, but I think that there are ways of handling it administratively when it does occur.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Miller. I think another great example of that is Poe Road, where we have 75, 80-foot pin oaks all up and down that roadway, and the rebuilding process and the installation of a new sidewalk. We just simply swooped around every single one of those trees, abutted them up right against the curbing, and therefore saved all of them and the aesthetics of that neighborhood.
Also, the informal complaint procedures would apply to any violation of the ordinance. So theoretically, if someone were to plant in a public right-of-way, they weren't supposed to, then the first step would be an informal complaint procedure, where Greg would go out to and this is section 22-16, so they wouldn't be slapped with a municipal court complaint. Greg would go out and say, I'm sorry that you weren't supposed to put that tree there. You have to remove it because it's a danger. Or, you know what, you weren't supposed to remove that without my permission, but it's okay, and we're just going to leave it at that. So the ordinance does provide for a procedure for that without having to impose a complaint answerable in municipal court in those situations. So there is that informal complaint procedure.
Okay. Did you have more questions?
I had several. So the next one is actually, we're authorizing the Shade Tree Commission to take an inventory of trees on public property. Was there any discussion of taking an inventory of trees throughout the entire town, including private property? If so, were there any issues that we should know about with respect to that?
I think the main problem was expense. I mean,
well, if we authorize as opposed to require, then the expense can be zero, or if they have the funds, the expense could be there. So I'm just asking the question really. I'm not mandating it, absolutely not. I'm not proposing that, but I am asking the question, did the Shade Tree Commission discuss the possibility of taking a more complete inventory within the town?
Sorry about that. I believe our next step would be more towards our public lands and our parks. That would probably be the next place to implement that whole process. I know that Marquand Park just had it done, and now those are all loaded into the system. So that's a great thing that we have access to now, and that was the Marquand Park Association took care of that for us. So yeah, I don't believe, actually I know we haven't discussed inventorying private property, but if we continue on our public lands or our parks and open space, I think that would be the next target item.
And that's already fully covered in the proposed ordinance, what you just described?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
And may I just add one thing? The way that the ordinance is drafted, the council can certainly authorize the Shade Tree Commission to engage in an inventory of private property if there comes a time where the council wants to authorize any expenditure involved in that, because under 22.4, under subsection L, it does allow such additional functions to be engaged in by the Shade Tree Commission as maybe delegated to it. So as an advisory body, the council may delegate that additional authority.
I read that clause to be much more restrictive because it refers to within the law. Okay. The next question is, it appears to me, upon reading the proposed ordinance, that there's a potential conflict between this ordinance and complete streets with respect to impermeable surfaces underneath tree drip lines. Was that discussed by the Shade Tree Commission, or how is that presumed under our current ordinances if this were to pass?
The drip line requirement is pretty much the maximum requirement that will be placed on a project, on a builder. Very frequently, we run into situations where we have to make adjustments. So if there has to be, coming closer to the main trunk of a tree, we try to expand the limit of disturbance further away from on the backside of the tree to save more of that root network. There are ways around this. I do know that the complete streets, that is going to cause some issues that we're going to have to work through. But I will say over the years, we've been awfully creative with keeping our streetscape intact. So I don't see that as being a major stumbling block, but you are correct, Mr. Simon, that it is going to pose some challenges.
Well, if that's the case, we may want to look at the language at the end of the ordinance, which says that any existing ordinances that are in conflict with this this takes precedence, and figure out how we want to balance those two ordinances deliberately, as opposed to, because presumptively this one being passed later will take precedence unless we, say otherwise. At least
And is the main concern also with Section 22-8, where there's a requirement that the drip line be maintained without any impervious coverage?
Well, there was that, but there's also a similar requirement in 22.6A4. It's actually there. It's specifically the roots and within the drip line. Yeah.
I don't think there's any intent here to impact any of the streets that are already in place. I think it's to prevent people from taking action that will cause any new impervious coverage, although it may not say that.
No, I understand that, but here's the scenario that could develop if we're not careful, which is somebody who does not want to pay for a sidewalk assessment uses this ordinance as a tool to prevent the municipality from proceeding. So it seems to me that we should be a little bit careful just in the language. And in terms of and maybe there's already protections elsewhere in the ordinance that say the municipality has the right to make exceptions for municipal right-of-way, including the sidewalks. I would have to defer to your judgment on that.
But if somebody can't plant in the right-of-way, I'm just trying to think, like if you're talking about
if there's an existing, for example, if there's an existing municipal tree in the right-of-way already, which in fact there was on Harriet Drive when the sidewalks went in. And the sidewalks were put in and they were within the drip line. In fact, you're going to be trimming limbs from those trees shortly.
Yeah, I met with the gentleman this morning.
Yes, so, and I'm not asserting this person would have done so, but you could imagine that there would be somebody who was deeply opposed to the imposition of an assessment on their property and is looking for a way around it and could use this as a hook. So, and it could be that there are appropriate exceptions elsewhere in the ordinance that I didn't quite catch, but that would be the question.
Well, under section 22.6C, now 22.6 deals with the trees in the public streets, highways, right-of-ways, and public property. And it does accept from the requirements of that section the treatment of trees and shrubs by the appropriate public agency with the consent of the enforcement officer.
Okay, so that should address that.
It should address that when
All
it's
right.
a tree that's on public property. If it's a tree that's on private property, it's a whole different ballgame. But if it's a tree on public property, then it's covered under this section. I don't know how that would come about, the tree on...
Well, if the tree extends into the municipal right-of-way, that would be the drip line, so it would be covered.
Okay, my next question is, the section 22.9 deals with utility lines and trees, and how is that administered and enforced with respect to utility work? This is another example of something where I would not expect most homeowners to be aware of this requirement.
It's actually, the obligation is placed on the utility company, not the homeowners. This is something that's actually essentially from state law, and it provides...
Okay, so it requires 5 days prior written notice to the enforcement officer. So I guess here's my question. If a utility is coming through town and is trimming trees that they view as interfering with the power lines or communication lines or whatever, what's the process for that? Do they already have to seek a permit, or do they have to notify the arborist, or how does that work?
Yes, Mr. Simon. What it is we deal with them on basically an open permit basis. Each time they come in to prune a circuit, they have to come and meet with me, and they normally do that about a month and a half prior to commencing the work. We ride the circuit that they're looking to prune. They provide me with a map. They have to go by and either have face-to-face or leave a door hanger comment card on each and every affected property owner. At that time, the property owners have the opportunity to contact the utility, and in some cases, the utility needs to contact me, or the homeowner will contact me, and we all meet together on the property to make certain of what the activity is going to be.
Okay, so this is already the process that's followed, and this does not change that.
Yes, it was a process that was developed when I came on 17 years ago, because there really was no process and there were nothing but problems. Since that time frame, I've dealt with a lot of different other arborists and asked questions about it. And the 10-foot requirement that they have for their electrical wires is something they are held to. They're held to by the letter of the law, unless they're making arboriculturally incorrect cuts on the trees. Then we allow them to make the proper cut on the tree so the tree will heal and recover correctly.
And there's actually a state statute that requires the 5 days.
So this is, okay.
The only difference between the ordinance and the statute is that we're also requiring the arborist to be notified in addition to the homeowner. But otherwise, the language is pretty much right out of the statute. And this is very similar to what was in place in the township. I think, I don't recall if it was 5 days or a different, it may have been a different time period, but I think we scaled it back.
Yeah,
I think it may have been 10 days,
I
but then I
think
think we
10 days,
scaled
yes.
it back because we wanted to be more consistent with the state statute.
Okay, and then my last question is simply, how is the Shade Tree Commission's budget handled? Is it done annually, and is it made public, similar to the process that we follow for the municipality?
It's in our budget.
It's in our budget. So we approve it. So even though they've got the requirement and the responsibility for the policy, the budget goes through this council. Okay.
Although with respect to trees on private property, the Shade Tree Commission is purely advisory. It's only the trees that are on public property where the Shade Tree Commission has a statutory authority. to take action. So it's a little different because it's kind of it has two major functions.
Well, with respect to taking action, what staff do they have to take action? Are they basically advising the municipal staff, the Public Works Department, or how does that work?
Planting trees on public property would be the main thing, I would say.
Yes, it is in an advisory capacity. So the municipality the Public Works Department has control over the situation, but we do, of course, listen to their inputs.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because I saw a comparison of the comparison sheet you gave us. The borough code specifically did not allow people to interfere with Public Works in maintaining trees on municipal property, and that was not included in the ordinance. So I wanted to make sure I understood what was in it.
Well, technically, the way this works is there is a statute that speaks to the functions of a shade tree commission. When you establish a shade tree commission, the Shade Tree Commission, it does state that this Shade Tree Commission has the power to exercise full and exclusive control over the regulation, planting, and care of shade and ornamental trees and shrubbery now located or which may hereafter be planted in any public highway, park, or parkway. So the function of who ultimately, the body responsible for the trees in those areas which is shifted to the Shade Tree Commission when there is an established Shade Tree Commission by ordinance. But the Shade Tree Commission essentially works through the Public Works Department, so they work hand in hand to get that work done. But the Shade Tree Commission is legally responsible for deciding the fate of trees in those areas.
Well, and I understand that, but my question is the Public Works Department protected from interference if they are working on on those trees?
If who is?
If the if the Shade Tree Commission and the Public Works Department meet and say these trees have to be maintained, for example, we've got old growth that must be removed for whatever reason, it's dead, it's dying, whatever, and the Public Works Department takes on that work, are they protected under this ordinance from in doing so from interference by private property owners or anybody else?
Ms. Maddox, if I may, doesn't 22.5 cover that?
Well, wouldn't they be on the right-of-way, Patrick?
Well, it also, yes.
They are, but my question is, I saw in this comparison sheet that it was excluded, that clause was excluded from the borough ordinance, so I'm just trying to understand what...
Well, there's a section, as Mr. O'Neill indicated, 22-5, it does say, it's a broader section, interference with work prohibited, no person shall prevent, delay, or interfere with any lawful work undertaken by the Shade Tree Commission or its authorized agent. So the Public Works personnel would certainly be the authorized agents of the Shade Tree Commission, because again, the Shade Tree Commission is the legally authorized body to determine what occurs on the public streets and highways, and therefore the Public Works Department would be the authorized agent in that capacity.
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
I had a question about the establishment of the Shade Tree Commission, just because we've had some discussions of this on council, so as to make sure we're clear here. This is under section 22-3. And normally for the other boards and commissions, it specifies they're appointed by the mayor with advice and consent of council, and I don't know if that language is somewhere else more generically, but here it doesn't say who's designating them, and I think it's better for us if we can be clear. So I don't know if that was intentional or...
No, it wasn't. This was taken from the reciprocal ordinances from 2012, so it was more of an oversight than anything, but we can certainly add language to indicate that it's the...
Yeah,
I'm just ensuring that there's nothing in the statute that would preclude that.
And the other thing that's not in here that I think would be good to have for all our boards and commissions is language that specifies if the board is electing its chair or if it's appointed by mayor with the advice and consent of council. And I assume that the Shade Tree chair would be appointed by the commission, but that language is also not in here.
Yeah, I think that was an oversight, and we've been trying to make all of the ordinances consistent, so I think, could we just ask Lisa to make it consistent? Or do we need that specific language right now? Because the state statutes sometimes say that the mayor does.
This does, but I think we're trying to be more consistent across the board. The statute does say that the members and alternate members shall be appointed by the mayor or other chief executive officer of the municipality, shall be residents of the municipality, and shall serve without compensation.
Does it say anything about the chair? Who designates the chair?
We have that here somewhere.
Give me a second.
A message from our
our
health department chair that it's good to not sit for more than an hour.
They didn't have an answer to that, too.
Sitting is the new smoking.
It is.
So every hour you need to get up,
I
yes.
think I said Under section NJSA 40-64(3), the commission shall organize within 30 days after appointment of its total membership, and thereafter annually by the election of one of its members as chairman and the appointment of a secretary who need not be a member. So it does provide for that, but I don't think it hurts to add it to the.
Yeah, I think if we could add those two things, that it's appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of council, and that they organize within 30 days and appoint a chair, just so that it's in there and clear.
Elect a chair.
Elect a chair.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yes.
Does the Shade Tree Commission think so too?
And then if there's not any pressing questions from council, I'd like to open it up if anybody from the Shade Tree Commission or anybody else who's here would like to speak to this.
I'm Janet Sterner. I'm on the Shade Tree Commission. I just wanted to go back to one of your earliest questions, Mayor Lempert, just to clarify. When you were talking about the minimum size of a replacement tree, were you saying that you think it should be 3 or that it should specify?
Both. I mean, I don't know if it's better to have a minimum amount listed in here.
Because I just wanted to point out that it is in here, but it's in a funny place.
Okay.
So you may not have seen it. It's in the definitions.
Okay.
It's in 22.2, would be 22.2H. Replacement tree shall mean a tree no smaller than 2 to 2.5 inches in caliper and of a species and size appropriate for the site.
Okay, yes,
So
thank
it's
you.
not under the replacement section, but it's here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to this? No? Okay. If there's no other questions from council, is there a motion?
Well, first I just would like to thank the members of the Shade Tree Commission who just went over this with a fine-tooth comb and I think really got it right. I think it's a great ordinance, and I want to thank you all that are here and also the ones who aren't here.
I'd like to second Ms. Crumiller's comments. Excellent job. It was an arduous process that we went through, 18 months. However, we came up with a very, very sound document, probably one of the best in the state of New Jersey.
And thanks to Greg and to Lisa for their hard work on this as well. It has been a long process, so well done.
Ditto.
Yeah, I agree. This is one of those projects where you start off and you can't quite see the end. And so thank you for sticking with us. And again, I think it's really important to have laws on the books that reflect who we are and our values and how we want to see the town. So thank you for helping to make that happen. But we do need a motion.
Actually, I have a
Yep.
question before we go to a motion, and this is for Ms. Maddox. If we're going to add the language that we discussed, is that a substantive change, and we're going to have to amend essentially next
Well, there
time?
hasn't been introduction, so what I can do is I can read into the record the proposed changes, and then you can vote after that, if that's okay. So I can...
There were 3 of them, too.
3 changes, right. And before, regarding the language for the mayor's appointment, in the Environmental Commission ordinance, the way that we phrased it was because the statute says the mayor, and doesn't say anything about consent of council. The way we phrased it, because it was similar in Environmental Commission, was the mayor upon consultation with council, just to ensure that we're totally consistent with the statute and also engaging the entire council. So, okay. So the first change would be, 22-3, this is to the draft that was circulated. Third sentence, the council was looking to add, the mayor, comma, upon consultation with council, comma, shall appoint the members and alternates, period. And also the sentence at the end of A, the commission shall annually elect its chairperson from among its members.